Hello, I'm David Schlegel here to talk about Arab and Muslim Americans for group presentations with particular emphasis on mental health treatment implications. So let's get started. A lot of stereotypes exist regarding Arabs, Arab Americans. As you can see from what's on the screen here, I had originally intended to show the video clip of Indiana Jones versus the Arab swordsman, but that's beyond my present level of technical expertise. But here's a couple still images. You'll probably remember the scenes. But suffice to say that a lot of stereotypes do exist. Here we have some photos of other Arab and Muslim Americans that represent some stereotypes that we've all been exposed to. The first one is a man wearing a head garment that we see a lot, uh, keffiyeh, if I said that right. Pardon me if I didn't. Is worn by many Arabs and Arab Americans. The color pattern can often represent a certain political affiliation. In the middle photograph, we see a woman wearing a hijab, which is a scarf that covers typically hair and neck. A lot of misconceptions about the hijab, whether it's required or not. Typically, it is not required. Some countries, such as Iran, may require certain women to wear that, particularly if they're going to be in the presence of a man who is not their husband. It originated from the Prophet Muhammad, who required all of his wives to wear a hijab so that they could be distinguished and shown as for the world to see their special status as one of his wives. And then we see a photograph of a very sinister looking Arab appearing individual with weapons and a very serious look on his face. Other characteristics of Muslims are characteristics that we often see with other cultural groups, very family oriented. Religion is important. Education is important, typically very generous, expressive, as we see a lot, and popular characteristics is that they are very hairy. Mhm. Um, Post 9/11 discrimination and victimization was a very real thing. For those of you that remember that time, um, Arabs and Arab appearing individuals or anyone that professed to be a Muslim was viewed with great skepticism. A lot of this discrimination was born of fear and ignorance. I think it has subsided a bit in the 20 plus years since the event, but a lot of it still lingers. It was a scary time, scary for Arab and Muslim individuals and others. A lot of uncertainty and just a scary, dangerous time. Travel restrictions were put in place legally in many cases. A lot of acts of violence and denial of service were common for Arab appearing individuals in the days following 9/11. Looking at this group, it's important to understand that we're really talking about two different groups with certain commonalities that we lump together for the purposes of our study. But not all Arabs are Muslim, and yes, not all Muslims are Arab. It's important to keep that in mind. While we do point at certain commonalities between these two groups, they are distinct groups. It's a little dangerous to lump them together, even though that's exactly what I've done here. But it's important to understand that there are differences. But for our purposes and for therapeutic implications, we'll go ahead and put them together. Arabs, where does that term come from? It comes from geographic considerations. Countries where Arabic is the dominant language is where we get the term Arab. And where do Arab Americans typically come from? A variety of different countries, and you can see the breakdown here. The vast majority come from Lebanon, with a fair number also from Syria, Egypt, Palestine, and Jordan are also represented. And then we have a makeup from different countries in the Middle East as well. Where do Arab Americans live in the United States? Predominantly metropolitan areas. You see large populations of Arab Americans in our larger cities. Los Angeles, Detroit, New York, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. are well represented with Arab Americans. Muslims, what's a Muslim? A Muslim is a follower of Islam. That's what the term means. And there are two major sects of Muslims. Sunnis represent about 90%, and then Shiites, a name you want to be careful pronouncing, is about 10%. The main difference is who can be a leader of the Islamic faith. Sunnis believe that anyone can, whereas Shiites believe that the leader must be a direct descendant of Muhammad. This important distinction, and there are others, this is the main one, this important distinction has led to much conflict within the Muslim religion. Where do Muslim Americans live? Again, it's predominantly in metropolitan areas, but a little more spread out than Arab Americans. You can see the representation from this graph of where we would find our largest Muslim American populations. Mental health treatment considerations. A lot of the considerations that we would apply to Muslim and Arab Americans apply to many of the groups we've looked at in this course. There may be a reluctance to share personal information, especially by men. Again, we see that in many of the cultural groups that we've examined, and it's certainly at play here with Arab and Muslim Americans. A holistic approach to treatment might be considered mainly because religion is such an important part of Arab and Muslim American life. It may be even worth looking at incorporating prayer and fasting in some of the treatment protocols that one might consider. Gifts are commonly offered as a show of respect and appreciation, and this may even happen with a therapist, perhaps as you're working with an Arab or Muslim American. Refusal of such gifts can be viewed as an insult. So it's important to consider that, and probably the best course of action would be to discuss this early on in a therapeutic relationship with an Arab or Muslim American to talk about how that might be handled and what the best course of action might be if gift giving were to be considered. Seeking therapy is not instinctive. Again, this connects to the first point I mentioned. So a therapist should be very sensitive to the fact that if an Arab or Muslim American is seeking therapy, it's not going to be a natural thing for them to want to do. So there's going to be some reluctance there. The fact that they're there is a big deal, and that should be encouraged and celebrated to an extent. And understand too that there may be some reluctance to fully engage in a therapeutic session, and that should be taken into consideration moving forward, that it may not be a reluctance for therapy itself, but just a reservation for speaking with individuals outside the family on personal topics. There's often a very strict patriarchal structure in place. So if it's a family therapy situation, it might be a good idea to speak with the lead male or father figure first as a sign of respect. Might ease the scene for everyone attending a family session. There's a historical mistrust of the cultural majority often, and we see this again with a lot of the cultural groups that we've looked at. So it's important to keep that in mind. That can often lead to some resistance to engage or other behaviors that might not work well to propel the therapeutic process. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. And a good course of action with that, and so many of these things that might hinder progress, is an open conversation early on about views of therapy and what the expectations are. Women may not shake hands or want to touch members of the opposite sex. So if you're a handshaker, you might keep that in mind moving forward, and just maybe allow an Arab American or a Muslim American woman to initiate any sort of handshake or physical contact. And again, as I touched on a moment ago, discuss with patients their understanding of the therapeutic process. What do they hope to get out of it? What do they believe it's all about? Then talk about your beliefs and opinions and desires and goals. Open conversation early on is going to really do a lot to set the groundwork for success moving forward with all clients, regardless of their cultural background. But knowing a little bit about Arab American and Muslim Americans will help. And again, with a lot of what we've covered with all of our cultural groups, it's good to take into consideration certain generalities, but not apply them too strictly. That knowledge of what a cultural group may be like from a more historical general perspective is important, but nothing is more valuable than treating individuals individually, regardless of their cultural background. So that's it for Arab and Muslim Americans.